Across the history of video games, there have been many massive franchises that could claim to be the most important ever made. Some people may say it's Minecraft because it's got the best selling individual game ever created. Other people may say it's Pokemon because it's generated more money than not just any other gaming franchise, but any media franchise as a whole. However, in my opinion, I think there is one series that is far and away above all the others.
It's me, Mario! Hello!
The Super Mario series has sold by far more copies of games than any other franchise, and has gone from just a simple arcade platformer that wasn't even really about Mario, to a multimedia juggernaut, containing a 52-episode TV show,
Do the Mario swing!
a recently announced second, or technically third, full-length feature film, and 270 games, spanning from platformers to RPGs, to tennis, to football, to Monopoly, kind of, to go-karting. I don't understand how a lot of these games factor into the story of the franchise, but they're all extremely popular, and sometimes people just want a silly little game where you can play as Yoshi. I've spoken a lot already about how the Mario series currently is in the present day, but to get a full grasp of how the franchise has come to be, we need to stop. We need to take a step back, a very large step back, to over 40 years ago, where a 29-year-old Shigeru Miyamoto has developed a small arcade game that, unbeknownst to him, will go on to change the course of gaming history. The year is 1981, and Donkey Kong has just been released worldwide. Now, looking at it today, the game might seem somewhat simplistic, and as if you could make it within 5 minutes on some browser-based program. However, at the time, this game was absolutely revolutionary. Its combination of unique mechanics and pretty much creating the entire platformer genre would lead to immense success and see Donkey Kong become one of the most popular arcade games ever created. This initial success led Miyamoto and Nintendo to realize that if they could take advantage of it, then they could turn this franchise into something extraordinary. The first step in this idea would come around a year later, when Donkey Kong Jr. would be released. The sequel took the ideas of the original... The sequel took the ideas of the original game and expanded upon them by making Mario, who, by the way, still wasn't given a name and was just known as Jumpman, because he's a man who jumps. Very creative. But they made him into the villain. However, Jumpman would eventually get his own name and his own game soon after, when Mario Bros. Would be released towards the end of Nintendo's arcade game venture, and would once again be an incredibly popular release. This game would introduce many ideas that would become staples of the franchise, but without a doubt, the two biggest being the full creation of the Mario and Luigi characters, who would go on to become some of the most recognizable icons across all of pop culture. Despite the success though, the overall impact of these arcade titles would go on to seem somewhat minimal when compared to the Goliath that was set to be released for the franchise's next game. Simply put, if it wasn't for the Super Mario series, it's extremely likely that gaming as a whole may not exist in the way it does today, or even exist at all maybe. But to understand why this is the case, we need to look at what the gaming world was like in the years before the Super Mario series would get its first ever console game. Between the years of 1983 and 1985, the video game industry seemed destined to fail in the Western world. This was caused by the mass oversaturation of poorly created, cheap, off-brand games that tarnished the reputation of the media source. The lower quality of these products led to people just stopping buying video games as a whole. This seems to have disastrous consequences throughout this 2-year span, as game sales constantly dropped, going from peaking at a revenue of $3.2 billion in 1983 to facing a 97% drop to $100 million in 1985. With this clear downfall of gaming set to occur, something big needed to happen in order to save it. And it would. The industry would get its lifeline in the form of a new console and a new series from Nintendo. On the 18th of October 1985, Nintendo released the NES, which is given the credit of dragging video games out of these dark times, along with its most popular game, Super Mario Bros. Both of these combined managed to change the overall opinion on the gaming industry in Western countries, as the revolutionary mechanics and features of the platformer would override the previously set narrative that games are just cheap cash grabs, which allowed the industry to be seen as a serious form of entertainment once again. After the release of Super Mario Bros., its future monumental success and popularity were clear to see, as it became the best-selling NES game by far and would remain on top throughout the lifespan of the console. Selling over 40 million copies worldwide, it is evident that without this title and the success it brought, the previously mentioned misconceptions about video games may never have been changed, and the industry wouldn't be thriving as it is in the present day. Despite the initial success of the Super Mario Bros. Title, Nintendo felt that their work wasn't finished yet, as they knew that they had a video game goldmine on their hands. This led to 2, or technically 3, sequel platformers being created, a console version of the arcade Mario Bros. Game, a Tetris-style spin-off game featuring Dr. Mario, and even an educational experience where players would travel across the globe as Luigi to rescue Mario while learning about geography and history. And all of these were released on the same system, within the span of about 7 years of each other. It was safe to say that Nintendo knew how important this series would be to their future success, which was especially evident when looking at the platformer sequels created. Super Mario Bros. 2 and 3 both introduced a vast variety of new mechanics in order to keep the game feeling fresh and new for players. It was these early games and Nintendo's innovative features that made Mario into the famous franchise that it is today. So, you know how I said there was technically 3 sequels earlier? Well, whilst the series was enjoying a large period of success, an interesting story regarding the first sequel in the franchise would arise. This being that Super Mario Bros. 2 in Japan and the Super Mario Bros. 2 in the rest of the world are completely different games. So, the Super Mario Bros. 2 that most people know is actually just a reskin of a pre-existing Japanese game called Doki Doki Panic, which Nintendo just took, replaced the sprites from Mario characters, and marketed as a sequel. There were 2 key reasons for this change. The first being that Nintendo believed that the actual Super Mario Bros. 2 would be far too difficult for Western audiences who seemingly preferred a more casual gaming experience. But the second reason was that Nintendo felt this sequel was a bit too similar to the original, and with the aforementioned video game crash being caused by the oversaturation of boring games, it's fair to say that Nintendo didn't want to risk the sequel being labelled as just the exact same game and then lead to lower game sales. After over a decade of dominating the world of console platformers, Nintendo decided it was time to create yet another industry-defining change in the market, which would come in the form of 3-dimensional platformers. Released in the summer of 1996, Super Mario 64 may have technically not been the first ever 3D platformer, but it was definitely the first to have a major impact on the genre, and the influence it left behind cannot be overstated. This game, much like the original in 1985, introduced a plethora of mechanics that would become staples of the genre. Mario 64, even nearly 30 years after its release, still tops multiple lists as the greatest game ever made. When a game this important is released, it doesn't just create a large impact on the industry, but solidifies the specific game, the franchise, and the genre as a whole as one of the most important aspects in the history of video games, and ensured that Super Mario would remain as not just one of the most recognizable game franchises ever, but as one of the most recognizable franchises in all of media. After the monumental release of Super Mario 64, it would only take around 6 years for another key addition to this storied franchise to be created, when Super Mario Sunshine would be released on the new Nintendo GameCube, and much like its predecessor, it was received with raving reviews. This pattern would continue itself with each mainline platformer that Nintendo would release. The Super Mario Galaxy games, Super Mario 3D Land and World, Super Mario Odyssey, all of these games would be received with similar critical acclaim, and would expand on the mechanics and ideas implemented in previous installments. This led to a consistently high amount of popularity for the series, which allowed the franchise to continue and thrive like it is today. The Super Mario franchise in the modern day simply can't be compared to any other series. It is far and away more than just a video game franchise. As I mentioned in the intro, it's become a multimedia giant spanning movies, TV shows, merchandise, educational games, sports games, and everything in between. But I don't think anything shows the huge popularity of the series, more than what happened at the end of the 2016 Olympics. I know that sounds random, but hear me out. To announce that Tokyo will host the next event in 2020, they had the Japanese Prime Minister at the time, Abe Shinzo, exit from a green pipe while dressed as the Italian plumber. If that doesn't demonstrate how important this franchise is, then nothing will. Things like this are why I think the Super Mario series is far and away the most important gaming franchise ever made. It built so many aspects of games, it saved video games pretty much, and its cultural impact is literally incomparable as nothing else can even come close.